Okay, we're going to get started here this morning. So I just want to thank you all for joining us. For those who don't know me, my name is Karen Hum and I'm the Manager of Membership Services. Also on the call with us today is our Executive Director, Jordan Abney, and Manager of Sport, Brianne White. So thank you for taking the time to join us. Hopefully you'll take away some information from this session that will help you in your role as Athletic Director. We expect the session to take roughly 30 minutes. So I'm going to walk you through the different functions of STARS, and at the end of each section, you will have an opportunity to ask any questions you may have. So we'll get started. The first thing is the login. Before you'll be able to log into STARS in September, your school administrator will have to complete the membership opt-in process. For those of you that were athletic directors last year, you'll remember this process. Prior to the start of each school year, we'll be sending the administrator we have listed each school an email to reactivate their BCSS membership for the coming year by completing the opt-in. The opt-in will just take a couple of minutes and it has to be done by the administrator. If an athletic director tries to do it, it will not work because it's based on the administrator's information. Once they have completed or confirmed that the current contacts or updated their contact information, an email will be sent to the athletic director inviting them to then log into STARS. We plan on sending the opt-out information emails to your administrator around the middle of August. If you were an athletic director in the prior year, your access will expire on June 30th, so you will not be able to get into STARS until the opt-in has been completed. Anytime during the year, if there's some contact information that needs to be changed, you want to add a second athletic director perhaps, just have your administrator send us an email and we'll make that change for you. It's also important that you don't share your STARS access with anyone. It's linked to your email and ultimately you're responsible for any entries under your login. So we're going to get started, hopefully by the login page here. So if we're at our website page in the top right-hand corner, you'll see a STARS login. By clicking on that, it's going to take you to our STARS login page. So there's a couple different options here. If you were an athletic director in the previous year, you don't remember your password, you can click on Request New Password. It's going to prompt you to put your email in, remembering you're putting in your school email address that your STARS access is created under. Once you put that in, you're going to be asked to hit your email. It's going to direct a reset password to your email. That should take a couple minutes. If it doesn't show up in a couple minutes, check your junk or spam email, because quite often it will go there. If you remember your password, you can just proceed to the login page. So I'm going to do that now. So once you get in, it's going to bring you to your school's homepage, your landing page. On this page, you're going to find all your school's contact information, as well as your enrollment numbers. Although you can see an edit key here, I don't recommend that you're ever editing your school contact information. If you do that, what happens is we don't know that you've done it, and some of our important areas like our accounting contacts, they don't always get updated. So it's better that you just have your school administrator send us an email, we'll make the changes, and then it'll ensure that they're being changed in all areas relevant to our, in our entries and so forth. The other thing you would never be able to edit is your enrollment numbers. We enter those and those are locked. The next thing I'm going to sort of go through is the tab keys across the top here. I'm going to skip over Teams and come back to that so that we're doing this in a proper progression. So we're going to start with your coaches page. So when you click on your coaches pages, it's going to give you a list of coaches that are currently registered or have coached in the past for your school. A couple things that you can look at here is if you click on the coach's name, it's going to provide you with a list of teams that coach has coached for you in the current year or in past years. So kind of a neat statistic if you ever wanted to see that. Going back, the other thing it will provide is an edit button. So at any time if your coach's contact information has changed, It's very important that you go in and change that. And we have to stress that a lot. We want current emails and phone numbers, cell numbers for coaches. So in the event of any emergency, we need to get through to a coach, we have that information. So I know a lot of times coaches, when they're first entering, or athletic director first entering a coach, you might not know that. So you might just default that information to yours so that you can proceed in adding them. Please go back and update that whenever possible. Okay, so those are the sort of main things on that page. Now to add a coach, you're just going to simply click on the Add Coach button. It's going to prompt you through the necessary information. Anything with a red asterisk is mandatory information. So from the drop-down screen, you're going to select what type of coach, whether they're a community coach, or a school district employee, or a teacher at your school. Once you've done that, you're just going to fill in the mandatory information. And as I said, we want a phone number there. So, you know, if you have more than one, great, but probably a cell number in this day and age is the best thing to do. And you're saving your coach. You go back, that coach will be there, and it's going to give you the message that they have been created. So that's the basics of adding a coach or viewing coach information. So the next one we're going to look at is students. So by clicking on the student tab, the first thing you're going to get is a list of all the students that are currently registered in STARS at your school. A couple of neat things you can do here is if you're looking for a specific student, you can use these top keys here and toggle, put them in alphabetical order. You could sort them by gender. So if you just want to see the females at your school first, looking for a specific student in a grade, you can toggle through the date of birth, same with grade 8 entry date, also the add date. So you can look at that and add students, see when they were last added, see what the status of the student. So right now we have 2 students that are pending at your school, which means you've added them to STARS. BCSS is still reviewing that student. Once they're reviewed, you will then get an email from BCSS to tell them that they're available to add to a roster. You'll also note when they're in a pending status, the edit key is available here. So for the edit key, at that point, because the student is still pending, if you've noted a mistake, perhaps to the spelling of their name, their date of birth, you have the option of going in and editing their information then. So I've recognized that I added the student's date of birth incorrectly. I can go in and edit. Once they've been approved, that edit button is no longer there for you. So if you've noticed a mistake to a student's name or you want it changed, perhaps you want to go by their preferred name versus legal name, please don't add them again. Instead, send us an email. We can make the change for you. Sometimes we're going to require some verification, but for the most part, we can make the change. It saves you adding a student again and having multiple files. The other thing that's interesting with our students here on the view button, if you've ever wanted, you could look to see if you click the view button, it will give you a history of what sports that student has played while at your school. So that's the main features of the student. The other feature we can do here is you're adding a single student. So by adding a single student, but before we do that, we have to make sure we have the necessary information. So we would need the student's name, first and last name, their date of birth, their grade 8 entry date. The other thing we need to consider, can we add this student? Are they eligible to be added? So if they're a grade 8 student, it's fair to say that you're at the beginning of the year, that it's okay to proceed in adding them. If they've always been at your school, you just never put them in STARS before, probably fine. If that student, though, has transferred to your school, we need to determine if there's transfer paperwork required. So there's some questions there you need to answer before proceeding. You can always check with us at BCSS to see if they were at a different school previous. We can tell you what forms to do. We'll go on that in greater details over that with our eligibility session, but those are the key things you need to know before adding a student. So I'm just going to go ahead and add a student here. Once again, anything that has a red asterisk beside it is mandatory information. The one thing that's not mandatory is a middle initial, so you can skip over that. And then the transfer type is the last information here. So if a student has always been at your school or they're in grade 8, there is no transfer type. The other option on transfer types are in province. So they've transferred to your school from another school within the province. They've transferred from outside the province, or they're an international student. By selecting any one of those, it's going to come to BCSS. We're going to in turn send you an email and say we require paperwork. We might ask you more questions to determine what forms you need to complete, but that's the basis of that. This student, for the sake of that, we're just going to consider them a non-transfer student. You're going to get a message here to let you know that the student was successfully added. And I'm going to just add one more student for you here, or try to add another student here. So let's go. Okay, so this one I've got an error message telling me that this student is already in the system, perhaps at another school. So it's not letting you add the student. You do have an option from here. If you notice, there's a request form. Essentially, by tabbing on that, what it's going to do is it's going to send an email. It's no different than you sending an email to BC School Sports. It's going to come to us. It just saves you a step of going into your email. The only thing I stress, if you're going to use this option to email us, that you put as much information as you can. So the student's name, the date of birth. A lot of people feel that because they did it from trying to create that student, we know which student this was attached to. We do not. So the more information you can share with us there, it'll help us answer your questions. So that's the basic add single student. Does anybody have any questions from there? Okay, then we're going to move on to the new student imports. So on this tab, once again, you'll have the option on this page to do the single student add that we did just previously. But the more common, or the one that we want you guys to look at, especially if you have grade 8 students, is doing a bulk upload. So by doing a bulk upload, you can upload all your students, especially your grade 8s. And if doing that at the beginning of the year and doing it before our first registration deadline, those students are automatically going to get approved and you won't have to wait for 2 days. There's no harm in adding students if you don't know if they're going to play sports or not. If they're not playing a fall sport, they might potentially play a winter or spring sport, or they might play in subsequent years. They're then already in the system for you, and it'll save you time as an athletic director. It also, like I said, speeds up the process because they're going to be automatically available. So to do this, there's a template that is being created in STARS, and it has to be done off of this template. So I'm just going to download the template there. So it's in an Excel format. It has all the same information that you do for a single student add, except for the transfer type. So you cannot use this form if you're trying to bulk upload international students or transfer students. It can only be done for students that don't have a transfer type. The only field here that's not mandatory, once again, is the middle initial. So I'm just going to add some information. Now, the one thing that I commonly get complaints from by schools is that they attempt to do this and then it doesn't work. A couple areas that are very finicky are the month and date of birth. As you can see, it defaulted to a 1-digit number. it requires it to be a 2-digit number. So you have to reformat that field to a 2-digit number. So putting the 0 in front. Otherwise, the upload won't happen. Quite commonly, schools will send me a copy of their template. I can reformat it. We also do have a document under our resources tab on bulk upload. It troubleshoots. It also looks at the MyEd, because my understanding is information that your office staff quite often can help you with. They have a list of all the students, but my understanding is that the birth date is in one column, so all 3 data. There is a way to separate that, and we do have a cheat sheet on that or a resource guide. As I said, that'll be posted under our resources tab under bulk upload. So a couple things to look at there. Once you've created your template, we're going to then download it. So I suggest once you create it, save it to your desktop, and then you're going to choose that file. I have one ready for us here. Once you choose the file, you're going to begin the bulk upload. Once it's complete, you're going to be told if it worked. So I'm getting a message here to tell me that 2 students were created, but 1 failed to create because they're saying that that student already exists in the system. So you can go in, the 2 students will be there. Karen Hum didn't upload because she's already in the system. So that's when you can email BCSS and ask questions or ask the student where they were before, and then appropriate forms have to be sent in. So going back to students here, if I look at my pending students, I can see the students that I recently uploaded. So these ones are all pending review. Right now, they didn't get automatically approved because we passed the first deadline. These all are grade 8 students, or they were this past year. So typically, if you had done that at the beginning of the school year before the first deadline in October, they would have automatically been approved for you. Is there any questions with regards to that?
I have a question.
Sure, go ahead.
My name is Brian DeMug. Do you have to still manually put in all of those names in that Excel spreadsheet?
Well, a lot of schools have, quite often with their office staff, because we understand as athletic directors, you're very busy, they have the MyEd data in a format that they can cut and paste that into the columns. But as I said, sometimes there's a challenge with the birth date, and they have it all in one column versus separating the year, month, and date. But you do have, like I say, hopefully you can do it that way, especially as grade 8s. If you take all your incoming grade 8 students from the MyEd and just cut the columns into it, as long as it's in this template that we have, that's probably, you can do it the other way too, or you're manually, but that's probably not saving you a lot of time.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Sorry, was there someone else with a question? Okay, so we're going to move back now. We kind of touched on coaches, students, and the new imports. We're going to go back to the team button. Now that we've added our coaches and our students, we can now add teams. So once you click on the teams button, it's going to bring you to a screen that lists all your teams. I don't have a lot here, but typically a school would have a lot. So a couple things of interest here, if you wanted to just maybe look at your female teams, you could narrow down the amount of teams that are showing in your window by doing that, or a specific sport, perhaps just soccer. You can search that way. The other thing that you can look at is your prior year's teams. So sometimes this will be helpful to you if at the beginning of September you want to sort of have a jump on your teams and you want to look what you had typically last year. You could do that and then create those teams for the coming year. There's no harm in creating a team and then not having that team. The only issue is if you add students and then the team didn't happen, it's important that those students are removed from the roster so that it doesn't create problems with their eligibility. So that's the sort of basic fields here in the screen with the teams field. So the other option here, a couple other things you can look at is you can edit your team up until the roster registration deadline. So if you had a change in coaches, you could go in, or now you have a teacher sponsor, any of those fields can then be edited. So to add a team, you're going to hit add team. And then from the drop-down menu, I don't have a lot of teams available here right now because we closed all our registration. So I'm going to go in and select esports. Then I'm going to select a coach. Only the coaches that you have in your coach data bank are going to appear here. I'm going to select my coach. For an additional coach, if you choose to add one, they also have to be in your bank of coaches in order to add them. You can add, if you want to continue adding multiple coaches, you can do so. Teacher sponsors, one of the fields where they don't have to already be set in the system. So you can add a teacher coach, a teacher sponsor, sorry. It's important to, if you have a phone number for them, like I say, the more contact information we have in the event of an emergency or anything like that, it's important that you add that information. Lastly, the last mandatory field here is, will this team be your provincial representative? You should always put yes. The only time not to put yes, or you can't, is if you are declaring more than one team in the same sport, age group, and gender. Only one of them can vie for provincial representative. So that's the only time. I get a lot of emails after the fact to do that, right? Unfortunately, I can't add that team because I've already got it created yesterday. So that's the Teams button. Once you've added your team, you then can start editing your roster. So if you're going to the Edit Team Roster, you'll be able to start adding students that are already in your system and been approved. So if you start typing the student's name, they should appear and populate. And you can continue to add the students along. I recommend after you've added students to always go back and view your roster. You can even generate a roster, a PDF copy of your roster. It'll have a date stamp on it and save that roster. You look below, it has the date stamp. It's also important that you're giving your coaches a copy of the roster before they go to games. You know, it's a great way to prove eligibility and so forth, but another way just to make sure that your auditions did happen successfully and so forth. The other thing in the Teams button that you might not be aware of, you go down to the very bottom, you can download all the PDF rosters for all your teams. So maybe at the end of the year you want to keep that information, you can view all the teams that you had and have PDF copies of those rosters. Okay, so anybody have any question with regards to the teams or adding teams or any functions in that aspect of STARS?
I have another question about that. I see
Sure.
that you have a lot of, can you go back to the adding players on the roster there?
Sure.
And you see that there's a number of fields you have, like position, uniform,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
and stuff. When you fill those in, do they always come up or do they not come up?
Yeah, they should come up. Yeah. The only issue that sometimes we've had is, and we're working with our developer, if you put all that information in, sometimes it distorts the way your roster looks like because the field is so wide. But that is one thing that you can edit even after the roster date closes. That information can be changed in there, but it's not mandatory information. But I know, for instance, volleyball is one that really likes schools to have that information because they extract that information for the program.
Right. Yeah, it's exactly like for programs or for keeping track of who has what player numbers, that sort of thing.
Yeah, so it will show on, I can give you an example. So let's just go for, I'll just assume this is volleyball, even though it's not. So if I go back in, so you'll see you can now see the information. I've just found that sometimes when they put in a lot of information, some get very descriptive. Like if the person plays a couple different positions, what it'll do is if you put too much, it sort of wraps that text and makes it the roster look a little differently, but that information will show on, definitely show on your PDF roster.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so the next item we're going to go over is our Tools tab. So the Tools tab, once you click on that, it's going to bring up a couple different options here. The one that you're probably most commonly going to use is the Move Up form. So if you have a student that's registered on a younger age team and you want them to move up after the end of their season, or you want them to be eligible to play on the older age team for playoffs, you need to submit a Move Up request. So this is all done through STARS. So by clicking on that, it's going to bring you to this page, and then you're going to select from the drop-down menu. It's only going to give you the teams that you have declared in STARS. You're going to pick the team you want to move them up to. So we're going to select senior soccer. Once you select that team, it's going to populate a list of students that are available to move up. So they're registered on the younger age team in the same sport and gender. You just need to highlight the students. So if you wanted to, all these Jill Smiths we want to move up, instead of submitting a separate form for each of them, if you hold the control key down on your keyboard, you'll be able to select multiple students. Once you've done that, it's going to bring you down to the Move Up date. So it's going to typically just assume that you want to do it to date. But if you're thinking in advance and you don't want to forget, and this is something you want to do on the end of their season, you can click on the calendar and it's going to give you the calendar. You can move it forward to months. You can't move it backwards because you obviously can't backdate a Move Up request. You're going to select the date that you want to move the students up on, and then you're going to hit Submit. So for athletic directors that have been around for a while, last year we instituted a new page here, and the reason being is that we can't undo a Move Up request. So we have now a confirmation page that comes up. So what it's going to do is just give you a summary of what you requested to do and on what date. So you should check that over, make sure that that's accurate information, because once you submit this, like I say, we can't undo it without a lot of problems. So once you've confirmed that there's no changes that need to be made, you hit the Submit request. It sends an email to BCSS and you're going to get your confirmation. We're going to confirm that we got your request, and then we'll move them up on the requested date. Does anybody have any questions? Remembering too, once you've moved them up to that senior team, the more senior team, they're no longer eligible to play in any competition on the younger age team for the duration of the season. Okay. So the next button is the Event and Sanctioning button. We actually don't actively use this feature. It was something that was built in when STARS was done. If you are looking to have one of your teams travel, you need to complete the sanctioning forms, and we are going to be doing some information on that next week in addition to the website. So those training seminars are next week. So if you sent this to us, it's essentially an email that's going to come to the BC School Sports. We're going to ask you a few questions and then send you the appropriate form. That's really all that's going to do. The next one is a general inquiries screen. Once again, this screen is typically just an email to us, so it's saving you the time going into your email box. It's going to send us an email. Has some preset topics that you can choose from, but once again, if you're using this, make sure you put as much information as possible, just like you would in an email. The more information you can share with us, the easier it is going to be to answer your question without going back and forth. And then the last and final feature in here is some reports that schools can run on their students and their participation. So the first one is students participating by grade and gender. So that report looks like a lot of data in mind. So what it's going to do is break it down by grade and by gender to let you know how many students are participating and then give you a total for that year. You can do that one only that one's only for the current year. The next one that you can look at is a yearly student participation. So this one's kind of neat if you wanted to sort of compare like where you have the most participation, or if you wanted to look at, so last year's grade 9s or this year's grades 10. So are they continuing to participate throughout their school year? So it's going to give you a 5-year summary there. And then the last report I think is probably most helpful for schools, especially at the end of the year if you're doing athletic awards or anything. This report you can generate, you can look at other years, but it's going to give you a multi-sport athlete. So any athlete that's registered on two or more teams at your school is going to show up on this report, and it's going to tell you what sports they're registered in. So if you're looking at awards, sometimes, or if a school or a school asks you that they have a student that's transferred to the school, or what sports did they play in, and they used to have to sign a form off on that, but you could go back and look what sports they played well at your school. But they would still be, if they should still be listed because they were at one time at your school. So those are a couple of the reports. And then that's the last and final tab is probably not going to be super helpful for you, but it's going to list all the users. So anybody that has a STARS login at your school or did have a STARS login and when they last logged in. For some of your schools, you'll have a fairly long record and they're going to be inactive. We don't remove them. Their access expires each June 30th, but they will be listed there. So that's the last button here. The only other thing I could perhaps mention is at any time if you want to go back to your home screen, this BC School Sports logo up in the corner, that'll take you back to your home screen.